get where I can get it.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of A Spirited Conversation with Lew Bryson, Liz Rhoades, and Marty Duffy, who have a variety of interesting topics to discuss this week. Real quickly, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co, and before I turn things over to your hosts, just wanted to point out a few of the features of the platform so you can interact with them throughout the presentation. Federico says he loves Marty's new shirt. Yeah, that is a good shirt.
Yeah.
What kind of glass is that? I've never seen it.
What?
That's a whiskey glass.
I was setting you up.
And
Oh,
Oh,
you should see my underwear.
all right.
Yes.
Before we go too far, as you'll see to your right, some of you have discovered the chat box over there. So feel free to say hello. Tell us where you're tuning in from. And in the middle at the bottom, you'll see an Ask a Question box. So if you have a question for Marty, Liz, or Lew throughout the presentation, pop it in down there. They're going to save some time at the end to go through those questions. And also, we'd love for you to share the event with your friends. There's a share button at the top right. You can invite people to join you from anywhere in the world. But with all that said, Lew, Liz, Marty, I will turn it over to y'all now. Take it away.
Thanks, Phil. Hi,
there we
everyone.
go.
You want to do our obligatory introductions?
Sure. So I'll kick it off. Thanks everyone for joining in today for this spirited conversation. I'm Liz Rhoades, technical distiller and spirits consultant. Have just over a decade of experience in alcoholic beverage. I am currently the founder and principal at Spirit Safe Consulting, where I specialize in technical process and quality support, product development, and spirit education. And with that, I'll pop it over to one of my fabulous co-hosts.
Go ahead,
Marty, do you want to?
Oh, you're pointing to me. I'm on your left over as far as I can see. Hi, I'm Martin Duffy, and I have over 3 decades of liquor experience. 2 of which was actually working in the industry. Actually, it's 40. 40 years of liquor experience, if that were the case. Yeah, so I was a master whiskey for DIAGEO for 14 years. Senior master whiskey is how I left it. And can't get any higher. And then they killed all the other masters of whiskey after I left.
There can only be one.
Yeah, there's only one. Very similar. Master Whiskey, Highlander, same thing. I'm still watching out for Rick Edwards and Simon Brooking because they're still always after this little baby. But anyways, Benedictine National Brand Ambassador for 18 glorious months. And then 8 years as the co-producer of the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo. And for the last 5.5 beautiful years, I've been the North American brand representative for a little glass I think everybody recognizes. Available at MartyDuffy.com. Actually, there's no MartyDuffy.com. So there you go. Lewis?
I am Lew Bryson. I write about whiskey. I write about beer. I write about whiskey. I was the managing editor at Whisky Advocate for 20 years. I have 2 books. I wrote Tasting Whiskey, which came out in 2014. My new book is Whiskey Masterclass, just came out in February. Awesome. A look at production of whiskey in the terms of flavor and aroma creation. Took a look at whiskey from grain selection all the way to bottling and beyond. There it is. Thank you, Liz. And looked at every step that either added or took away or accented flavor and aroma. And that's this slender but fact-packed volume you see before you.
Check out the acknowledgments, because
both of you, yeah.
Well, see my name in print, except at the post office.
That's what I do. I'm also currently a senior drinks writer for the dailybeast.com. Just had a piece on craft beer future, and before that, pandemic projects to do at home, home brewing and setting up a home draft system.
I thought that was creating your own pandemic.
There was why does whiskey taste like whiskey, which is a beautifully deep question. So speaking of deep questions,
how about the deep questions?
Yeah, as always, we have 3 questions to discuss today. One about the industry during a time of pandemic, one in which we get down and get geeky with our bad selves, and a general fun kind of question. I wanted to start with the COVID one this time, if that's all right. Does that sound good? What we wanted to talk about this week was something we've noticed. There was actually just an article in USA Today yesterday or today. I can't remember which it was. I think it was yesterday. Relaxation of liquor laws. We've got a lot of really bizarre liquor laws in this country left over from Prohibition and repeal. And they've just been hanging on through inertia. Just some really odd regulations. For instance, I live in Pennsylvania. I live in the Philadelphia suburbs. Among our many bizarre alcohol laws here, there's one that says you can buy a 6-pack at a bar. You can buy 2 6-packs at a bar. But if you want to buy 3, you have to buy 2, literally step outside the door, and then you can walk back in and buy a 3rd one.
Is there a law in Indiana where you can't walk backwards down the street while eating peanuts?
There is a law in Indiana that says you can't buy cold beer at a supermarket. It has to be room temperature.
Really lukewarm or super hot.
Because if it was cold, you might want to drink it in your car on the way home, because none of us have ever drunk warm beer.
On the way home, yeah.
There's a law in Indiana where you can't buy good beer.
So what's going on is a lot of these odd laws have been relaxed during the pandemic. People are, for instance, a fair number of states have allowed bars to sell cocktails to go. A lot of them put really odd little restrictions on it, like it has to have a sealed cap. They talk about what container it's allowed to be. But essentially, you can get like a jug of Manhattans to go home. Some of them seem to be a little light on details, as in there's no talk about what volume. So I assume a half-gallon jug would be fine.
Or ABV, composite ABV even.
Or if you stepped outside, came back in, you get a full gallon jug.
That's it. Somebody said, could you just take a bottle of Jack and pour it in a jug and put an orange slice on the rim, and there's your cocktail to go? But the point is,
straw coming out of a giant tub.
That's right. You just take piece of tape on the end of the straw so it's sealed.
On the
crazy straw. Drink at home.
It's in the trunk.
Wait, Lou,
the real question is not, there are a lot of weird laws. There are a lot of things being relaxed now. The question is, a lot of these laws the relaxations seem to be written to be temporary, like through the end of the year or until the pandemic's over, yada, da, da, da. Are we really going to go back?
I don't see it. I think it's a golden rule out there. It's not a golden rule, but it's a kind of a rule of thumb that once a law is out there, very rarely, with the exception of maybe Prohibition, do you get that repealed. Usually you don't get something repealed. Say it's, here in Illinois, they're talking about increasing the amount of alcohol, the number of bottles and gallons that a distillery can sell out of its distillery. Right now, there's a ceiling on that, which is kind of stupid because, by the end of the year, a distillery like Blum Brothers, right around Christmas time, we can't sell you anything. We've reached our max.
Well, that's the whole record keeping aspect of that is annoying. Like it's incumbent on the distillery to keep records of how many bottles I have bought.
So if that were to be overturned or increased, you can see that the distillery guilds would fight and say, well, wait a minute. No, why? And it doesn't make any sense anyways, because why are you putting a ceiling on any industry, on any company?
Right.
To sell. I mean, you don't do that for anything else. And the
Well,
only
that's the thing. I mean, I argue that the whole idea of liquor control, I mean, that's what it's called in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board.
Yeah.
I mean, this limitation on the distillery has nothing to do with drinking. It's just about business. I mean, all it means is you can't get a bottle of whiskey at Bloom Brothers. I mean, you can go to another distillery or you can go to a liquor store.
Well, but usually so here in Illinois, it's because of distributors.
Right.
The large distributors. You have Breakthrough based out of Illinois, and they're a powerful company. And so they don't want folks, which is it's still goofy. The vast majority, now I'm not going to drive 2.5 hours to Bloom Brothers to go get a bottle. Right. I'm going to go to the local liquor store, which is being serviced by the distributor. So it seems asinine that people but
sorry, I'm looking at the sidebar here. Somebody wrote 3-tier system. Goofy.
Yeah. Well, but now, Lew, I was going to ask, can you explain? So you are in a control state. Can you explain?
That's correct.
What control state is?
Pennsylvania is a control state. It's one of 2 states in the country, the other one being Utah, where the government is the almost sole retailer of spirits and wine. So Pennsylvania is the wholesaler for all spirits and wines. They are the retailer for all spirits and wines. We have to go to a state liquor store, of which there are about 600 in the entire state. I would point out that there are 600 liquor stores in Chicago. I've done my research on this, and the population of the entire state is about the same as Chicagoland, but we have a bit more area to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to go to those stores to buy everything except the stuff that's actually produced here. Pennsylvania produced wine, Pennsylvania produced spirits, beer, cider, mead, whatever. I don't know if there's anybody making kvass. That you can go to the producer and buy. And there's actually pretty good laws in Pennsylvania about self-distribution, better than most states, in fact, for the producers. It works out pretty well. So the control state means the state gets all the markup money, they get all the taxes directly through the stores, and they get to select what gets sold. And
seems awfully shady. Seems awfully shady. The whole idea of the state
and corruption, not to mention incompetence. There was just a thing about Utah's system, purging the system of like 16% of all the brands because they don't sell well enough. One of the brands is Hendrick's Gin, for God's sake. And I have to suspect the reason it doesn't sell well is because they're sending it out to every little sheep herder town in Utah, and they look at it and go, I don't know what this is. It's got cucumbers. I don't want that. Where's the Gordons? And we run into the same thing here. In the control stores, the Potter County, which is the archetypical Pennsylvania rural county where there's more deer than people, they have one liquor store, and there's a set of stuff that they send up there, most of which I'm sure those people there don't even care about.
Well, that's a big thing. I mean, here in Chicago, I remember a certain bar, I will not name, has a number of bottles on their back bar that aren't necessarily bottles that are available legally in Illinois.
Well, now there's another thing. You have to register these things and have them legally available. I know. I go down to D.C. Washington, D.C. is the freaking Wild West. Essentially, if you can get it to your store and put it on the shelf with a price tag, you can sell it. Yeah. Why is that so weird?
It shouldn't be. Well, because again, it's all these. It's not even lobbying groups. It's really
shareholders, stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who has whether it's a large distributor or whoever, it's moving in on their territory.
Yeah, it benefits somebody.
But the state, going back to that bar, the bar, I asked, hey, aren't you afraid of the state coming in and, going, whoa, that's not available here. You're going to be fine. Well, no, you know what? The state, the people who work for the state have no idea. They have no idea what's, what that bottle is, or even if it's available,
We actually had a case 5 years ago where the Bureau of Liquor Control Enforcement, which is a branch of the Pennsylvania State Police, raided 3 bars in Philadelphia for unregistered beer. And then I think it was either the day after or the 2 days later, went and raided the wholesaler that was selling the unregistered beer. Not only did it turn out that their database was wrong and the beer actually was registered because they had it in under the wrong name, they got to the warehouse, the wholesaler's warehouse, and they were going to seize all of it. And they had to send out for a tractor trailer. They had no idea how much of this stuff was being sold in the state.
Jesus. See, I mean,
and at the end of it, it came to nothing.
Yeah.
So I guess I can tell these stories all day, literally. And if you want to do a show like that, I'd be happy to. It'd be fun. But it would be fun for me. The point is, I think a lot of this is going to go by the board because I think this is showing people how odd some of these laws really are and how pointless they are.
Liz, how do you break this down scientifically?
I mean,
Liz, is our in-house brain. So
feel free to speak as a drinker, Liz.
Well, sure. So I was just going to ask. So who are some of the bodies that would lobby for some of this legislation change?
Well, that's how it has to happen.
Distillery guilds would be one. I mean, that's what they've made some good inroads here. The Illinois Distiller Guild. They actually increased the amount you could sell out of your distillery, but not a lot. Again, there's still a ceiling, which is just ridiculous. So those are, I think, right now, those would be the major, but they are really the Davy to a number of Goliaths out there,
right?
Including
I mean, privatization in Washington, it took Costco to get it through. That's the kind of money you need to have.
Yeah, exactly.
And
right.
I think that's probably what's going to get privatization through here if the grocery stores decide they want to sell liquor. Because right now they can only sell beer and wine.
Well, who did that in Washington? So Washington State was a control state, and
yeah, that was Costco.
That was Costco.
Yeah, it was essentially Costco versus the wine and spirits wholesalers, and Costco outspent them.
And Liz, I believe one of the things that's interesting as far as some of the big brands helping a lot of the small brands is that Jack Daniels has been very helpful, and Brown-Forman has been very helpful to the Tennessee Distillers Guild. They're part of it. It's not called the craft distillers, it's the Distillers Guild, so they're part of it. And obviously they bring a lot to the table, and they have a lot of oomph, and especially in DC. There's even I know of a distiller in Virginia who got tired of fighting with his congressman, so he ran against him and won.
Ah!
So he's now in Congress, and he's fighting against some of these laws. So
I'm kind of surprised Bill Samuels never did that.
They wouldn't allow him with the golden robe and the pimp hat. I don't think he'd actually fit in pretty good in Congress. I think.
So we had a question. So while we're still on the topic here of liquor laws, so Johnny said ABC just passed a new one in SF with outside drinking. So I've seen that being popped up of where, especially when, we're talking about social distancing and
right, it can't be in a room.
How that, right. So, outdoors, a lot of space, that you could accommodate, 6 feet, et cetera. But a lot of states, counties, et cetera, they say, outside drinking, that's, that's a no-go. So how do you guys see that?
Children might see it.
What was that, Lou?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, we have that here. It's strictly limited how much space you can use outside if the sidewalk isn't wide enough, yada, yada, yada. I absolutely think that a lot, I know that a lot of these laws go back to that far. I mean, the whole thing about when you see people walking around with a bottle in a paper bag, that's so children don't know they're drinking booze, which is nuts.
Well, when you think of New Orleans, I mean, think about how that is just all over the place. And it's about, I mean, I think little young Wilson Torres here in Chicago, he brings up, in Chicago, you have patios and rooftops. So there are those. You can get some places, if there's enough room on the sidewalk, you can have the kind of little cafe section out front of a bar or restaurant. And I'm all for it. I don't believe in people walking down the street with. It's one thing in New Orleans because the French Quarter always seems kind of quartered off, anyways.
Yeah, pretty much the only thing that's in there driving is either tourist or delivery trucks.
Right. That's great. Tourists who have been drinking, driving very narrow, very old.
Large music festival in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania every year, the Celtic Fest. It's a huge Celtic music festival. And somehow they've managed to get open booze for those, 3 days of the big weekend?
Right.
Nowhere else in Pennsylvania. I don't know how they do that, but
you know what would be nice is if you had an area like Grant Park or Central Park in New York, and you allowed bars to have satellite bars out there where people can spread out, people can move around. You have a drink, you just can't leave the park. Here in Chicago,
we have something like that here. They've done a very liberal interpretation of catering laws to allow pop-up beer gardens, except they pop up for like 3 months. That's enough for the summer season.
Well, see, but that, I mean, I say,
and directly to the point we're discussing, when the legislature said, we need to regulate this more. These rules are being taken advantage of. The outcry was so huge that they just forgot they had brought it up, and nothing happened. And I think that's what's going to happen.
So Wilson mentions setting hours of operation, say 6 to 9. I mean, that's kind of true for
outside. Yeah,
that's true for most outdoor patios now. Here in Chicago's, I believe you shut down at 11. Used to be, there was a couple of bars in the good old days, open till 4. If you didn't have anyone living within, say, 500 yards. Those
non-residential. Can see that. So, what do you want to do next? You want to save the geek, or you want to get to the geeky now?
We can do the geeky now.
Let's do the geeky now. You got your toys?
Yeah.
Marty brought toys.
I did. Well, this is something I want.
Show and tell. That's
your take on this, because I failed science so many times. Years.
Yeah.
I failed 8th grade science about 4 years in a row. So we were talking about.
What we're getting at is.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, you go.
We wanted to talk about ice. Icing down your booze. What does it do? Is it okay? So, could you talk to the actual chemistry of what's going on? I mean, I think everybody knows what you put a bottle of a glass down, you put ice in it. But what happens?
Yeah. So I think there's two kind of. Thank you. In case our listeners didn't know what an ice cube tray looked like, we have Marty Duffy, everyone.
Full service education here.
But I think
one's half the size of my head.
There's two pieces, right? There's the water conversation, and then there's the ice conversation. And I think those two can play a different effect. So certainly, I guess let's start with the ice. So just one more time for due diligence. Let's see.
What, this?
There you go. So
Yeah.
something like that, right? So
If you want balls.
that's what, like a 2-inch square ball.
Okay. All right.
Right. So there's obviously a surface area conversation, right? So if you're in a giant, ball of ice or square, you don't have as much surface area if you go with the smaller cube or the chips, Chicago ice, right? Where
Wait.
it would melt more quickly.
Give me a Chicago.
What is Chicago ice? I've never heard that.
Chicago ice is very specific. You just need that water fresh from Lake Michigan. With all that, what's that bacteria that grows every summer that closes the beaches? That is what gives that ice that tingly feeling and burning sensation in your mouth.
It's
Now,
just
what is Chicago ice?
smaller.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you mean like in bars? Is that a thing? Is Chicago known for its smaller ice cubes in bars?
Yeah, it's a type of ice, and it's smaller, so it's not like chipped.
Yeah, right.
It's not the cubes or it's just more pebbly.
Yeah, more
Gotcha.
If that makes sense. So
Okay.
right, so certainly there's the size conversation. So that has to do with surface area. Something that's going to be a little bit larger, you have less surface area, so it's not going to melt as quickly as something with pebbled ice or something like that. So I think that's kind of the first piece to it, right? So ice having an effect. A lot of people I know like a lot of ice. I personally don't. I don't like the first sip being, very pungent, and then the last being like I'm drinking water. I don't think that's a very good experience. But then there's a few different factors that play in when we're talking about dilution specifically. So whether it's ice or we're talking water in this instance, and the few things to call out are A, temperature, B, volatility, and C, polarity.
Oh,
Yeah.
You like
come on, bring
the
it.
South Pole? Wait. You have to drink along the equator.
So if you're talking the ice situation, right? Obviously, it's going to be colder. If you're just talking about diluting something with water, first of all, so when you dilute ethanol, so something that maybe 40%, diluting it down to 30% or something like that, that act of dilution is actually an exothermic reaction. So for those of you who may not be familiar with what exothermic means, basically
No idea.
it creates heat. So that reaction that takes place, causes heat. So it might change the temperature of that matrix a little bit, which could then, change the volatility of certain congeners within that matrix. So I would say overall, the volatility is more, so you would get more aroma compounds, coming through. You have a question? Yes.
Yes. I've always thought, especially with large ice or even a big, just cram in a glass full of crushed ice or the small Chicago ice. One of the things I always thought, and one of the things Lew and myself and Tom Johnson have talked about, is how aroma affects your sense of taste. And I always thought that you create an atmosphere in a glass where you are with ice that suppresses the aroma, keeps the aroma down. You usually don't pick up as much in a cold glass as you do a warm glass. Therefore, it would affect my final drinking experience. However, I've also found that there are certain whiskeys I like with ice, and certain whiskeys I don't like with ice. Some I drink neat, some I drink with a splash of water. Some I really like. Talisker, I always thought was a great whiskey on ice, mainly because as it melted, you discover different levels of flavor to it. It actually gets
Experience
sweeter.
changes.
Huh? What was
Your
that?
experience changes. Is that what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
My
Yeah,
experience.
it's almost like it's auto-proofing itself.
Yeah. Plus, there's the weird habit too from my bartending days, and I'm sure most of you bartenders out there always get the guy who wants, hey, no, don't dump the ice. Hey, pour it on top of the old ice. I want that ice to absorb the flavor of the whiskey in the ice. I got that a lot when I worked on Rush Street. The Guidos would come in, hey,
Wait.
when you dump my ice, I get that drink for free. What? I don't see how that.
I love when people make up rules.
Yeah. That only apply to me at that moment. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Liz. So what do you think about that?
So
Wait. I'm still waiting on the
point.
polarity thing.
Okay, go back to the polarity thing.
We're getting there.
I'm sorry.
But
I don't want Marty to distract you from the
right.
polarity.
Don't go towards the polarity. Come
Can
back.
you just mute him?
Wait,
So to your point with the ice, right? So you're talking about that's a temperature difference, and yeah, if it's colder versus warmer, that could affect its volatility of the matrix. So basically, aromatic compounds, they have to be volatilized to reach your olfactory to be able to smell them. So temperature playing a huge effect on that, right? So the amount of ice you have, if it's warmer, again, just the fact of adding tap water to add to cause an exothermic reaction. So temperature itself plays a critical role. So we mentioned volatility. So there are actually certain compounds that are more volatile than ethanol. So ethanol is pretty volatile. And there's certain compounds that are actually can be more volatile than ethanol when ethanol is at a lower concentration.
So Liz, would you say that you prefer drinking your whiskey neat? Is that what you said?
Like 1 cube usually.
Why 1
smaller?
Why?
Smaller. I don't.
Do
I like it to do it really quickly, so it's a very even experience for me. But it also mentioned, so a lot of people are saying do dilution 50-50 with, 1 part water, 1 part your whiskey. And I guess back to the conversation we had last week about sensor analysis and an ABV, a correct ABV to do sensor analysis, which I kind of mentioned, 20%. So if you fact check that, that's about 20%, right? 40% ABV is pretty standard for whiskey. Right. And again, you're kind of cutting some of that ethanol, sharpness, from that. So I guess the third kind of point, so getting to this polarity business, and I won't get too in depth with it because
as
it's
a science
true.
professor talking to the detention kids. Plus, you used the Matrix. I didn't even mention Keanu Reeves.
Stop! She was almost there. Sorry.
Look, comment.
Yeah. There's no comments. The reality is there's a lot that happens when you're talking about interactions with water and flavor compounds and ethanol. So kind of back to the polarity conversation. So the two main, I guess, components really when you think about whiskey are going to be water and ethanol. And so ethanol kind of behaves in a way, can be amphipathic, where it has an affinity for water, and then also hydrophobic kind of compounds.
Really?
So there's also other, so not to sidestep, but this is actually kind of one of the theories, or not theories, the principles behind using hand sanitizer, and why 60% ABV is, you need that high of an ABV. And again, this is a whole other conversation.
That's okay.
But one of the main reasons why, especially with viruses, why we say 60% ABV or greater, it has to do with the amphipathic action and how that acts against other amphipathic or hydrophobic or fatty compounds. And again, not to talk COVID, because we've already talked COVID, but a similar sort of scenario can happen in whiskey as well, where there's a lot of different congeners and compounds that may be amphipathic or more less water loving and desire kind of hydrophobicity a little bit more. And so what happens when you dilute ethanol, and you basically change the ratio of water, you're increasing water, so you're increasing sort of the polarity of the matrix. And so what happens is that there's certain molecules that don't remain in solution.
It's pushing them out.
So, yeah, exactly. So if you think about a glass of whiskey, this is not whiskey, because that would be 3 fingers of conversation there. If I
There's a major conversation about maybe your drinking habits.
Just to get through all your distractions, Marty.
Seriously though, those are Booker fingers, for God's sake.
Big old sausage. That's a Chicago sausage. Wait, what is that, Liz? What do you have a jar of sitting on your
It's iced coffee. It's iced coffee.
Oh, okay.
Sure, I know you scientists. That has to be some kind of specimen you've been forming.
So if you have a matrix, and let's say it's mostly ethanol, for example, and so you have this matrix with different molecules that are within solution and bound up with different ethanol molecules. Once you start changing that ratio, you then kind of, again, like you mentioned, you're breaking apart the dynamics of that solution, and some compounds then come to the surface because they're being released from that bound matrix.
Hey, Liz.
And so, like we talked about earlier, go ahead.
Well, some of that, you've seen when you add a drop of, especially cold water to a whiskey, and you look at the whiskey, you'll see the swirling,
the swirlies,
oils, the releasing of the snakes, as they say in Scotland. Is that some of that going on? I mean, typically, I think they always told
the
us
interface.
That's the one.
Just kind of that interface of that ratio changing.
I'm stealing that. I'm using that.
What, the interface?
The interface. No. 2 words. Interface. That's what I prefer to think of it as.
So to bring it back.
Yeah, bring it back.
Why not?
We didn't even talk. I know you wanted to talk about different types of water as well, but just mentioning a couple reasons how water and ice can affect the sensory experience. So again, they kind of mentioned temperature, volatility, and polarity as some of those reasons, and how dilution can affect the imbibing experience.
So the temperature can tamp down the volatility, which means we're not getting some things, but it sounds like the polarity, the breaking the matrix thing, is releasing other things. Is that
right? But then the temperature thing, so if you have something jam-packed with ice, right, that's going to dampen the volatility of the matrix overall. But yeah.
So Hello. I want to talk to you about the jar you have. I want to talk about besides ice, the whole taking a bottle. We used to do this with some of the classic malts. You take a bottle of St. Dalwhinnie and you put it in the freezer, or Gold Label, Johnny Walker Gold Label. Put it in the freezer and comes out with more viscosity. It does change the flavor as well. But then it would revert right back. Another little weird side thing. I did put a bottle of Cardew, and you saw a lot of the oils congeal at the bottom, float around like globulars. But then they melt right back once you warm it up. But how is that affecting it? You know, why does that make such a big?
Well, that's what I've heard people say. You know, why put ice in your whiskey? Just put your whiskey in the fridge.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're not getting the dilution.
Right.
Right.
But
yeah.
if you like your whiskey cold, that's the way. But it
then
does,
you like it cold.
But it also does. It's not just making it cold. It does change it. It does change the flavor. You get very little. I shouldn't say very little.
It's almost like you're temporarily chill filtering it.
Kinda. I guess so. You're taking you are taking the oils and putting them at the bottom of the. But I mean, then again, it's not a lot, and I didn't see that with a lot of other whiskeys. It was mainly this one bottle of Cardew. So, scientist, why does that happen? And why does bad things happen to good people? Can you answer that scientifically?
I mean, well, I think with any matrix, right, we talked about the two components that are largely within whiskey are water and ethanol, right? And so water obviously will start to freeze. Whiskey won't completely freeze because of the ABV, but as that water, in there probably starts to go into that phase change, that definitely would change kind of that matrix a little bit.
Can we also just state that whiskey stones are an abomination? Does anyone use these? Does anyone seriously use these? I bought these.
Yeah, people who sell them. I think that's it.
I bought these in Sweden years and years ago, and I thought this is how the Swedes enjoyed it because, the Swedes. Anyways, these things are. I couldn't imagine reusing these, or actually even using them. Here, let me put a rock in your whiskey.
The whole teeth thing concerns me.
Yeah.
Now, do you have metal ones as well, or just?
I've seen those. Yeah, I never bought them.
Seen them.
I don't have them. I've seen them, but I've never. I have this. The ice bomb.
The ice bomb.
Which I kind of like this idea as far as just chilling your whiskey without.
What's in there? What is the liquid? Is it just water, or?
I guess so, because that freezes.
Oh, okay.
Is, a tempered glass, and so you just put it in your freezer. You take it out, and then you stir your whiskey with it, and so it will chill it. I don't think it doesn't get it as cold. It might get it as cold as your one ice cube, but then you're also missing the dilution.
The dilution factor. Yeah.
Some folks.
The one I like, I have I don't know, I lost it when we were doing a bunch of cleaning. I had one of the glass sickle glasses. Have you seen those? It's like a heavy square-sided tumbler with a silicone mold that goes over the top, and it creates a wedge of ice in the glass.
Yeah.
And then you take it out and you pour whiskey in there, and on a hot day, I like that. Yeah.
Could be.
That's funny. I've never really cared for cold whiskey in the summer. I mean, it's never really, to me, it's always, I guess it's the thing about whiskey too. Since there's so many different people who have so many different preferences. I mean, like I said, I have certain whiskeys. Talisker I like on ice. Lagavulin I like drinking neat. I like getting the full impact of Lagavulin. But Talisker, just ice seems to complement it to me. I know to some folks it doesn't.
I think we can segue here, talking about personal preference and how
I'll go get my
different people different people taste whiskey, different people experience whiskey. Our third topic, which we put in the, I guess we put in the general arena. I've been seeing a lot of talk on Facebook, on Twitter recently. People talking about. So I opened this bottle and didn't like it at first. Let it sit for a month, and it tastes better now. And people referring to this, did you open it and let it sit for a while? They're not talking about drinking a bunch down. They're just talking about cracking the seal, pouring a glass, closing it, and letting it sit for a while.
Aerating like a bottle of wine, except much longer.
Except you don't really have that much change.
You don't have that much change
in the amount of oxygen. It's a tiny little bit of headspace.
No, but if you've opened it, you have allowed extra oxygen in. I mean, you've taken the cork off, right?
Absolutely.
What we're talking about? Go ahead, Liz.
She's eager to say something.
My counterpoint to that argument is it just sat in a barrel for 6 to 8 years.
But it didn't change.
But there was an effect. There was an effect on the whiskey from the barrel during that time.
From the barrel, sure, but there's also a lot of headspace.
Right.
A lot more than there is in a bottle.
Oxygen being a key catalyst to a lot of maturation reactions.
Here's here, I'll put the label around. Thank you, High West. Nice whiskey. It really is. That's what I'm drinking now. But, I mean, that's with like an ounce and a half out. Okay, and it was this full before. That's just not that much more air. I mean, what really changes a whiskey once you open it is the loss of alcohol.
Right.
That's going to change it.
Yeah.
But unless you're leaving it open, you're not really losing that much alcohol. Well, except the alcohol you put in your glass.
That could be the determining factor, though, to why someone, now I like it. Because now it might have been.
I just don't think there's enough change. Like, there's, well,
what about when a bottle, even an unopened bottle, if your grandfather left a bottle down in the basement, 50 years ago, now you bring it up and, hey, you never opened it. But you've seen that some has escaped. Some has evaporated, and it's down around the shoulders. Typically, the rule of thumb is if it's evaporated to the point where it's around the shoulders, it has changed a great deal. I mean, oxygen has gotten in there and an effect.
Again, it's not so much that the oxygen's getting in; it's that the alcohol's getting out.
No, right. But what about? But there's also. What about Liz?
It's an alcohol a lot more.
When I had an experience once. A buddy of mine was moving from New York to Scotland, and he had all these bottles, and they were sitting up. They're all remnants, right, from whiskey shows, and he had them sitting up, unfortunately, on the cabinets around his little kitchenette. So they're exposed to a lot of heat from cooking. And he took them all down. He bought a bunch of expensive cheeses. We were going to pair them up. And lo and behold, they all sucked. They all were horrible. They were, he'd have this much left in the bottle. Yeah. And big time. It seemed like all the alcohol. It was like non-alcoholic whiskey. It was still brownish. But it wasn't, there was no flavor to it. Or the flavor.
Yeah, see, that I have no problem with. It's the idea that one glass
you open it
for
up
2 months.
Yeah.
Well, doctor. I'm looking at you.
So Lou, I'm with you, right? So maybe if you open something up, hear me out.
Yeah, Marty's just undecided, I'm sure.
If you crack something open, there is always a little bit of headspace in a bottle when it's shipping, etc. Which while shipping, it's not under a reefer truck or something, but there could be some temperature maybe swings when it's being shipped, or or at the store, for example, or sitting in someone's car in the summertime. But when there tends to be ethanol that will gather, those vapors will gather in that headspace, and when you do first open something up, that's going to be that your first impression. So I mean, maybe that could be a theory into why people are like, well, at first it was just maybe a little bit harsh or hot or something like that, and the second time I opened it, I didn't have a bunch of ethanol gathering up at top.
I mean, I can certainly see a difference in you pour an ounce of whiskey in a glass and you swirl it and sip it and let it sit for 20 minutes, half an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And see, here's a little tip for somebody who basically spends a lot of time in bars. When you look at, especially if it's a more expensive whiskey, and you go into a bar and you'll see remnants along the top, or even actually on a back bar, where they have a pour spout. They're not returning the cork, sealing the bottle tight. Don't buy it, because that baby is a lot of the genie has left that bottle, baby. You're getting the genie's pillow, or slippers or something, because most of the genie itself is left the building. That bottle.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone to bars where they will have the pour spouts, but they'll have paraffin film wrapped around it every night. Yeah. Literally every. I like that.
Yeah.
I'll say, though there's a lot of places they put the little paper cones, and that's okay for keeping. Most
flies
of that
out.
is done to keep the flies out, as opposed to letting the genie.
But are those high volume? Those are typubly high volume pours, though, right?
Not if you go to a lot of these whiskey bars where there's so much whiskey. It's like going to a brew pub where they have all 40 taps. That those
some of them aren't moving.
Yeah. I went with one distiller here in Chicago. We went to a bar, had loads of whiskey, and we spotted his whiskey on the back bar, but he hadn't been available in the city for the last 5 years. The bottle, we asked the guy to bring the bottle over, and it looked like a Chablis at this point, because the sun at a certain point of day on the back bar. So it was bleached, it was drained, it still had the pour spout on it. I thought, wow.
Well, that's what I always thought. You remember when Chicago Whiskey Fest, the big bar there at the Marriott?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, yeah.
All those bottles right there at the window.
Yeah. Well, I had a bar like that in the 90s. All of our stuff was, in fact, in Ireland once.
There's no sunlight there.
The little sunlight they got was they had all their spirits right in this open window. It was one of those windows just and it looked pretty. It was nice, and the light from the outside shines through their little selection. But they had a bottle of Midori that was just a shade of green. Really light green. When I tasted it, I go, oh my God, this stuff. There's somebody adding water to your Midori, or
it tastes like zucchini.
Yeah, I've had a McDonald's McShake that was more than that. Did you have more, Brain?
I think my network is breaking up a little bit, but I think we should move to questions, maybe.
Questions.
Oh, we just got one.
Oh, we did?
Oh, from the fabulous Eric. Hey, Eric.
Eric.
What does being light struck do to a spirit? I mean, when that Midori thing happens, I mean, are things breaking down? I mean, I know what it is when beer gets light struck. There are certain wavelengths of light that hit hop oils and hop resins in the beer and literally chemically transform them, unfortunately, into mercaptans, which smell like skunk ass. But what happens in What happens when a whiskey gets hit by light like that?
I guess I won't necessarily comment on whiskey, but if we're talking spirits in general, so if we're talking about flavored, let's say a flavored whiskey that might have a lot of sugar, or even I would say anything with citrus really doesn't hold up well in those scenarios. So lower ABV. So if you're talking about liqueurs or something like that, high sugar also can really, if it's really bad, can turn to almost celery. So there's different phases that kind of happen throughout that process. Yeah, celery.
That's a nasty thought.
Is a really bad one as well, because it can turn pretty quickly. I mean, it's driven by pH as well, but also the ABV of the product. So there's a lot of factors, but that can come off as just like a chemical.
And with most liqueurs, I mean, a lot. I shouldn't say maybe most, but a lot. Say Midori. That's most likely artificial. I don't know how you make the Midori, but I'm assuming that's artificial coloring or artificial colored syrup in there. And so obviously it's being bleached. The sun, the light.
Color fade.
Fade, just like it would anything else. I always surprised. What?
I was just going to mention natural colorants versus maybe unnatural colorants can have a big effect.
Well, so I was going to ask.
Natural colorants usually don't.
Oh, okay.
With the whiskey I saw, Liz, I was kind of surprised that the color faded, since the color is coming from the wood. And I don't know, I suppose color is color. It's going to fade. It would if left out.
Yeah, I mean, wood fades.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting only because obviously I wondered if the color in a whiskey attaches more to the alcohol or more to the water, or does it make a difference as it matures? Is that a silly question? Dr. Brain. I'm not going to answer the question.
Give her a chance.
Yeah, she was laughing at me.
I can't say that I've done a lot with color fade and shelf life. To comment, actually.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, here's another question.
We have another question, one that and it's not really what we're talking about, but it's a question I was keeping the cork hydrated, because I just had a cork fail on me the other night, and I had to resort to heroic measures to get it the hell out of the bottle.
Well, I can tell you this. A lot of people make the big mistake of laying a bottle of whiskey down.
Right.
Like a bottle of wine, which is a big mistake because there's a lot more alcohol will dry out the cork, and I think it's just like a good bottle of wine, though. I mean, usually where do you store wine but in a cool, moist place? If you're a lot of my whiskey I'll put in a cabinet, and
I'm afraid my problem is that it's too dry. It's not. Yeah. It's cool where I put it, but I'm afraid it's too dry.
You almost need a humidifier.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have it in the basement, and my wife's got a dehumidifier going all the time.
See,
I love my wife. Just saying.
Video proof in case Lew's wife mysteriously ends up missing.
It's a dehumidifier accident.
So, Liz, what do you do? Do you have a scientific reason for this?
I actually have a solution to it. Drink the whiskey.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And the other thing, could we use synth corks? Could we use more synth corks?
What about screw
Why not
caps?
In whiskey?
They
What's
say
that?
Screw caps are...
Screw caps?
Yeah. They
a
say
good screw cap.
A lot of screw caps are just as good as... I mean, true, I've had some screw cap bottles that obviously weren't put on tight enough, and they lost quite a bit.
The other, there's a few... I guess, issues, with that. So any sort of liners, to make sure whatever liner, is compatible. That's not going to cause any off notes. So that's a big one as well. I would say some of the scent, or the ones with the kind of the shrink sleeve, again, like back to the volatility, just making sure that those don't actually pop off during transit, because the liquid is heating up and it may cause.
I had that happen with a corked whiskey. I was driving in very hot temperatures that day, and the cork popped right out.
Popped off, yeah.
Lou, I remember asking years ago, consumer asked me, how long can you keep a bottle of whiskey, especially after you have opened it? How long, will it last? And I thought, well, I don't know. I've never, since that time.
I've never had that problem.
Yeah. And so I asked, I went back to Scotland. I asked some of the various guys I knew at DIAGEO at the time and said, hey, especially you ask a distiller like Charlie Smith, who used to be at Talisker. You ask him, and I think he said, I told him, after you open it, how long can you keep it? Can you keep it for a couple of years? Will it last for a couple of years? Who the hell's keeping it a couple of years? Dang it, goddammit. They're going to buy another one. You want the place to close? That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got whiskey to drink. Don't use it as a doorstop or a little mantelpiece decoration. And stop sending it to me, because I can't keep up. Way too much whiskey people send me.
Yeah, I've heard
about there.
What, Liz?
Oh, I was just going to say I've heard similar things from other distiller friends of mine, that whiskey should be shared and drank, not on the shelf.
Well, do you think?
Yeah, I try to stick to. I'm having both my books. I try to stick to a 40 and out rule. Once it gets down to about 40%, I try to finish it within the next couple of months.
That a boy, Lou. Well, it's tough though, especially if you do have a lot of whiskey. I didn't have a lot of whiskey, but I've accumulated so much, and I don't drink that much at home. So, what am I supposed to do? But now it's like homework. It's piling up back here. I haven't done my homework in years. Hey, one last question for you, Liz. This is a scientific question. If the Grinch's heart grew 3 times that day, how the hell did he not die of a major coronary? You're a scientist.
Is this a question?
I think that comes
you're asking
from Bill from Tiny Cork, Kansas.
With that, thanks for joining.
Yes, that's a good way.
I don't get an answer. I want scientific answers. All right.
Hey, we're going to have our first guest next week. Don't.
Yes.
Yeah, register.
For next week. Next week, we're going to have Bill Welter from Journeyman Distilling.
Bill Welter, Journeyman Distillery, the beard.
As a guest. And we're going to ask him impertinent questions and make fun of his mustache. So, well, he'll have to grow one.
His mustache is just, it's like one big pile of hair with a trucker cap on top.
So, that'll be fun.
Thanks, everyone. Hey, don't forget, Lew's book, available on Amazon. I think it's 80% off right now. So go to Amazon. No. It's brand new. Best-selling. It's on the Marty Duffy best-selling list. 3D, Lew Bryson.
Do buy the book. Please buy the book. It's a good book.
All right, kids. Everyone. Johnny, Wilson, Mark, Monique, John Boy.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
All of you. Good night.